Hello, towel friends. My name is Grant Smith Ellis. It's just about 4:30 p.m. on May 12, 2025. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've been watching the John O'Keefe and Karen Read retrial, I have wonderful news. Alan Jackson finally ended his 14-hour cross. Yes, Alan Jackson spoke for 14 hours without saying much of anything, and it's finally over. Ladies and gentlemen, my word, Hank Brennan managed to say more in 2 hours on redirect than Alan Jackson said in 14 hours. The entire American trial-watching public began to lose their minds, ladies and gentlemen. I am surprised that half of us are still going, if not for Alan Jackson somehow bringing up the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and potentially trying to blame a dog named Chloe in a wig who looks like Chewbacca. I don't think any of us would have made it through the trial. But ladies and gentlemen, we got through day 14. It's finally over. Now, if you're just getting caught up, we're going to take a look. There wasn't much of anything that happened. Alan Jackson went in circles for hours. At one point, it was even reported, ladies and gentlemen, that Alan Jackson pulled up this screenshot and told, I'm being sardonic, Alan Jackson did not actually bring this screenshot up, but he may as well have. He spent hours on this screenshot, and one of the reporter towels in Towel Stream named Christina indicated Chewbacca may have even been in the parking lot that Alan Jackson was talking about while making no sense. Yes, it may well be a record for one of the longest cross-examinations, the most gratuitous, the most bloviator-based, the most nonsensical-based cross-examination any of the towels have ever seen, ladies and gentlemen. My word, I cannot put it into words, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's take a look at Hank Brennan's arrival today at court. That'll show up on your screen right below the wonderful towel comments. Yeah. Oh, hold on. I was yelling during the video, so I'm going to turn the volume down. Apparently, Towel likes to yell. That does not surprise me, ladies and gentlemen. I am a towel. Oh, there's Hank Brennan walking into court, strolling like a Hank Brennan. Yes, Hank Brennan is a verb now, ladies and gentlemen. Hank Brennan is a verb. You can walk cool, calm, confident, and collected and become a Hank Brennan. God bless you, Drew Drops. You even joined in the recap. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Karen Read also arrived in court. That was not really as important, but we can take a look at it. Very little really happened. I think Karen walked up behind her lawyers. We'll take a look. Yes, there's Karen. Or there are her lawyers. Where's Karen? Please play the. There's Karen. Walking slowly like a Karen. I don't know if a Karen is a verb. We're not using it pejoratively. She is just a Karen. Not that kind of Karen. She's literally named Karen Read, ladies and gentlemen. What do you want from me? Not that much happened today. All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, we eventually came into session, and one of the first things that we saw was that there was 3 motions submitted. One, the Aruba incident. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been watching Towel Stream, you know the Aruba incident is a huge deal because Karen Read on December 31st, 2021, just a few weeks before John's death, saw John hug a family friend named Marietta Sullivan in the hallway of a resort. Karen then, a few days later, on January 5th, apologized to Marietta Sullivan's sister, Laura Sullivan, and said that Karen just mistook John hugging his dear family friend who called John Godfather in the hallway. And Karen tried to pay for the woman's room and things like that. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 weeks later, on January 12th, 2022, Karen Read started up an affair with John's friend and lied to John's friend. Said to John's friend that John had cheated on Karen in Aruba on December 31st, when John had done no such thing and Karen had previously admitted that. And ladies and gentlemen, John's friend ended that affair after he realized Karen was only using John's friend to torment John as John and Karen's relationship broke down. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why this motion to bring in the Aruba incident was such a big deal. Let's take a look at how it went.
On these, I've had a chance to read them. So, Mr. Brennan, I'll hear you. Let's today focus on the Bowden ones. We can focus on the other one later.
My motion memorandum on Bowden just iterates my objections continuously at sidebar, that not all evidence is admissible characterization of evidence is not admissible, and the defense should have the ability and intention to follow up with substantive proof if they're going to act.
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen. So I will follow up here. We'll do this first, actually. So the Aruba motion did not actually get argued. Judge Cannoni delayed it a little bit, but I can show you the Aruba motion, ladies and gentlemen, because we have it saved. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I know where we can find it. Now, the Aruba motion in particular has to do with, as I just explained, the information about coming in as to the incident on December 31st, 2021. Now, the motion that you just heard argued related to Karen Reed attempting to get around Judge Cannoni's prior ruling on not raising a third-party culprit. We're going to see Reed eventually, Hank Brennan wins that motion, Reed loses after a voir dire later in the day. But first, ladies and gentlemen, let us take a look from venerated reporter towel Christina Rex, who is not venerated reporter towel Christina. These are two different people. Christina Rex, of course, is a venerated reporter towel for WBZ, who also goes to New England Law. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, there you can see the motion from the Commonwealth to introduce evidence of the Aruba trip. And for those of you who might just be tuning in and not familiar with what this means, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to watch during this recap just to explain to those who are looking forward to what could be coming in during this week just how bad the Aruba trip is for Karen. But before we do that, let's go right into that, because the Aruba trip was one of the biggest moments of we'll pause. The Aruba trip was a big moment of the day, but let's jump forward to the Bowden motion, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it a little bit earlier before we talked about the Aruba motion, which we're going to close the recap with. Let's watch what happened after the voir dire when Alan Jackson and Hank Brennan's dueling motions on the Bowden information was ruled on. Alan Jackson loses.
So, Mr. Jackson, I've considered your argument, and this is simply the wrong witness, so I'm not permitting that line of testimony.
Even for the singular request that I made a sidebar.
Even for that, so.
You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. Alan Jackson lost his motion. Now, we are going to look, we did just look at the Aruba motion, and ladies and gentlemen, the Aruba motion, all it says, Hank Brennan had initially called Laura and Marietta Sullivan on his witness list, but wasn't going to bring up the Aruba incident in his case in chief. He announced this previously. However, the defense opened the door yesterday by trying to present Karen's text to Higgins out of context and the defense tried to make it look like Karen was being honest about John cheating on December 31st when John never cheated in Aruba. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, Hank Brennan has now motioned the court to bring in the Aruba incident to counter what the defense tried to present yesterday. And we are going to watch, ladies and gentlemen, because I will say not very much happened. Ladies and gentlemen, not very much happened during the rest of the day. So we're going to close on the Aruba motion, but there was one incident, there was one important moment that did happen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we got testimony from a state police officer, and there's going to be more information coming from Ring. But let's listen to this testimony. This is testimony from a state police officer. I think it was on Hank Brennan's redirect after Alan Jackson's cross finally ended, where Hank Brennan elicited testimony that Karen Reed was on her laptop in the operative hours between 2 and 4 p.m. on 1/29/2022. Now, why is that relevant? Well, here's why. Ladies and gentlemen, there were 18 Ring videos on John O'Keefe's home system between 12:37 a.m. when Karen got back to John's house after allegedly striking John at 12:32 a.m. and 7 and 16 seconds and then driving back to John's house. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there are 17 missing Ring videos between 12:37 a.m. and 5:08 a.m. that day, okay? Only one video was left at 5:08 a.m. of Karen staging a bump into John's car to create pretextual and false reasonable doubt about why Karen's taillight was broken when it was clearly broken before Karen got to John's house at 12:37 a.m., etc. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's another Ring video deleted beyond those 17 damning videos that would have been devastating to Karen's defense. And that video was deleted after 12 p.m. It was a video of Karen and her parents after Karen was sent to the hospital after confessing at the scene to hitting John with her car, and then her parents sent her to the hospital for making threats of self-harm, where blood was taken at 9:05 9:03 or 9:06 a.m., and then the blood results came back at 9:53 a.m. with her, Karen, having a .093, which was above the limit, legal limit even after 9 a.m., and a retrograde blood alcohol level. Serum conversion indicated Karen's BAC conservatively at the time around when she struck John was 0.14 to 0.28, which is 2 to 4 times the legal limit. Karen made threats of self-harm. Her parents had her sectioned. As I mentioned, she leaves the hospital after noontime, goes with her father, her brother Nathan, and her sister-in-law, who's Caitlin Bordeaux, all on the state's witness list. They go back to John's house. They collect the murder weapon, the alleged murder weapon, and they bring it back to Karen's parents' house in Dighton. Now, listen, the key thing is there's a video there missing of Karen and her brother and her father and her sister-in-law leaving John's home with that SUV. Now, that means the deletions probably occurred in the window between when Karen got back to Dighton in a blizzard with her father and brother and sister-in-law around 2 p.m. and when the state police arrived at Karen's home to serve a warrant on her phone and her car and collect the car with the broken taillight at 4:12 p.m. that day. Now listen to this testimony where you are going to hear a state police sergeant talk about how when he came to serve those search warrants on the phone and the car and talk to Karen, she was casually, stoically sitting on her laptop. Let's listen, ladies and gentlemen and fellow towels. It was an important moment.
She was calm, stoic. She was sitting on the couch with a pillow on her lap, a laptop to her left. She was, I guess, maybe poised when she was answering our questions.
When you finished your conversation with the defendant, had anybody in that home ever mentioned the idea of whether or not John O'Keefe went into 34 Fairview that night?
No.
When you went outside to get in your truck and follow the...
You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it right there. You heard it. Karen was on her laptop. That was the window. The Ring experts are on the state's witness list and expected. The Ring keeper of records, not an expert, a Ring keeper of records is on the state's witness list. Didn't testify during the first trial. What do those records show? They're more detailed than you would get in a police investigation because once you subpoena Ring to bring documents to a trial, it's a more stringent form of court order. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, what surprises are coming yet? And then, ladies and gentlemen, here was the confirmation that Karen Reed and John O'Keefe got into an argument, and the state police were aware of it in the moments before John's death.
Jurors, this is an offer for the truth that's contained in the statement, simply to show that this information is provided to the police.
The defendant made a statement questioning whether Mr. O'Keefe was still alive.
And anything about the nature of their disagreement?
Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant got into an argument.
So for the same purpose.
As you're learning this information, does it in any way shape your continued investigation?
Yes, it further supports witness statements. It further supports and corroborates information that we're learning. The more information we collect, the stronger the case becomes.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That was one of the big moments. And now, folks, we must watch the Aruba incident. You saw the motion. I'm going to bring it up on your screen. Or I already brought it up on your screen earlier. I will share the motion as well on my Twitter feed once we're done with the day. The Aruba motion. And you might be saying, okay, the Aruba motion, why is this such a big deal? Why is everyone freaking out about Aruba coming in when Hank Brennan didn't initially want to play or bring up Aruba? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Karen Reed defense walked right into it. And we, to close our recap, are going to look at why that Aruba testimony, which Hank Brennan has now motioned to bring in, and which that motion will be approved. It was approved during the first trial. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the testimony from Marietta Sullivan. Let's take a moment, by the way, to note that today's stream is in honor of my dear father, Fredric Ellis, who passed away overnight from cancer, as well as Crime Cricket's mother, who passed away this weekend. So we'll speak more about that at the end of the recap, but that just went past the Twitter thread, and I saw that there was hundreds of you who left supportive comments, even David Yannetti himself, who I think might have either worked with my dad or my mom or both. in the Middlesex DA's office so many years ago. Even David Yannetti had words of condolences for Little Towel. And I'll tell you, folks, if that doesn't bring a tear to your eye, a showing that all of the sides of this case, in some sense, have universal humanity and compassion, I don't know what will, folks. I don't know what will. I didn't know it would take Little Towel's father passing for people on all sides to show that, but Towel is, I suppose, pleased in a bittersweet way that you all took that time to do that, and that it was this moment that brought so many of your so much of your shared humanity out. That has a very profound impact on Little Towel. But let us continue. We're going to watch the build-up, folks. We're going to watch the testimony that we know is coming from Marietta Sullivan now that Hank Brennan has submitted his motion. And this was the testimony from the first trial, May 22nd, 2024. Let's watch it, Towel friends. This is the end of the recap. We know it's going to be bad for Karen, and Hank Brennan, with the bombshell motion, it hasn't been ruled on, to bring in this testimony for the retrial, Karen Reed's own doing. Let's watch it together. My name's Grant Smith Ellis. This is the part of the recap for day 14. Because of Hank Brennan's motion to bring in this testimony. This is the Marietta Sullivan testifying during Karen's first trial. Hank Brennan wants to bring in this testimony for the second trial. And it's bad news bears for Karen Reed.
So the elevator gets sent down to the lobby. You walk out with anyone you see when you come out.
So when the elevator opens up, the first person I saw was the attendant standing behind the desk. I didn't see anybody else in the lobby with me until I stepped out. When I stepped out, I looked to my left and I saw Johnny coming in through the first set of outside doors.
Now, as far as Mr. O'Keefe was concerned, was there any other sort of term that you would use to refer to him?
Johnny or Godfather.
And, Your Honor, I think this may be the appropriate.
All right. So folks, I'm going to say again that first instruction I gave you with the last witness, that you're about to hear testimony about certain conduct or behavior allegedly committed by the defendant. Ms. Reed is not charged with committing any crimes other than those charged within the indictment. So this witness's testimony may not and must not be considered by you as any evidence that the defendant has a bad character or as evidence that she may have a propensity to commit the crimes with which she's been charged. You may not take the defendant's prior acts that you'll hear about as a substitute for proof that the defendant committed the crimes charged here. But you may consider the act solely on the limited issue of the defendant's state of mind and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe as it might go to motive or intent. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose. Specifically, you may not use it to conclude that if the defendant committed these acts, that she must also have committed the offenses with which she's been charged. You can only use the evidence for the limited purpose of how it goes to the defendant's state of mind, motive, and the nature of her relationship with John O'Keefe. And for the same findings that I made at sidebar.
Proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
So you walk out of the elevator, you're by yourself, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you see Mr. O'Keefe. Could you see where Mr. O'Keefe was in relation to the lobby or where he was coming from?
He was coming from the outside doors into the lobby.
Is that where the pool bar is located?
Opposite side.
Opposite.
Yes.
And when you see him come in, who, if anyone, do you see with him initially?
Nobody with him.
And what, if anything, was he doing, or how was he acting sort of when he came?
So he sort of stumbled in. I came out of the elevator and my initial response to him was, "Whoa, you okay?" I actually said, "Whoa, Godfather, are you okay?" But yeah, he was stumbling into the lobby.
And did you go over to him at that point?
I did. I went up to him and I gave him a hug.
And what happened then?
I pulled back. He was glassy-eyed, looking above me. We never made eye contact. He was looking above me. It looked like he was looking for someone. I asked him, "Where are you going?" assuming that he would be coming to the pool bar to meet us. He kept looking around and he indicated that he was going that way and pointed toward a bank of rooms to our right. And I said, "Well, you should go that way." And I stepped back and I guided him toward the area that he was going.
Now, as far as the bank of rooms to the right, you indicated that you were familiar or aware of where Mr. O'Keefe was and where the children were. Is that correct?
I know they were on the first floor. I'm not 100% positive as to where exactly their rooms were.
And if you know, did you know whether or not that Mr. O'Keefe was staying in the same room as Patrick and Kaylee at that point?
I didn't know if they were staying in the same room or not, no.
So you point him in that direction, and what happened?
So I pointed in that direction. He walked off. I continued out to the pool bar when I heard very loudly his name screamed across the lobby very angrily, and it made me stop in my tracks.
And when you stop in your tracks, what happened?
I started to turn around to come back in. So once you go out to the pool bar, you kind of go around a corner and you go out of view. So I turned around to go back in. As I'm going back in, I hear someone yell, "Who the fuck was that?" And as I come around the corner, I see Mr. O'Keefe walking toward a woman. And he said, excuse me. He said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister."
And what happened then?
When I came back around the corner, I said, after Mr. O'Keefe said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister," I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." That's when Miss Reed's head snapped up, and she very loudly told me to go fuck myself across the lobby. And I said, "Yeah, fuck you too," and walked away.
And just to be clear, when you say Miss Reed, this is someone that you became familiar with as the trip went along?
This was my first interaction with her. I had never been fully introduced to her at all. I just had seen her sitting by the side of the pool when I had been talking to Johnny earlier in the day.
And the person you know to be Miss Reed, do you see her in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you just describe as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Sure. She's in a black and white checkered blazer. She's 2 people in from you.
Just ask the record to reflect identification. Anybody with this?
Yes.
Thank you. As far as Ms. Reed was concerned, what, if anything, did you observe as far as the defendants beyond the yelling? What, if anything, did you observe as far as her demeanor or how she was acting at the time that this interaction was going on?
She was just very loud. She very, energetically screamed for me to go fuck myself. She was waving her hands. Johnny was trying to calm her down. And after I said, "Yeah, fuck you too," I went out to the pool bar, so I didn't see much after that.
And could you hear anything as far as when you were walking out to the pool bar, as far as any other conversation between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe?
Not after that first time, no.
You go back to you go out to the pool bar, and who, if anyone, did you talk to?
I went straight up to my older sister, Laura, who was out to dinner with the couple the night before. And I said,
I'll allow this part.
I went up to her and I looked at her and I said, "John O'Keefe's girlfriend?" And she looked at me and said, "Karen?" And I said, "Yeah, you guys like her?" She said, "Yeah, she's okay." And I said, "Well, she sucks."
Now, following that, at any point in time later in that evening, did you see either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed later on that evening?
I did not see them, no.
And when was the next time that you did see them?
I saw them briefly on the 2nd, which was the day that we rented cabanas on the island.
And when you say you briefly saw them, can you describe them?
So we had all rented the cabanas. Each family had one or they were sharing one. I was sharing one with my family down at the end. We got about halfway through the day and realized that their family cabana was still empty. So I saw them about halfway through the day when they did come to the cabana, and I briefly saw Miss Reed and Mr. O'Keefe at the pool, the island bar that same day, but there was no conversation.
Now, with regard to Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed, at some point in time on that day of the cabanas, what, if any, conversation did you have with your sister regarding that?
So my
objection.
I don't know what this is.
All right, now, folks, there is one more part of this. The Aruba motion actually has a second component because, if you remember, If you just heard that testimony, Karen never followed up with Marietta Sullivan or apologized to her. Well, folks, listen to what we're about to hear. We're going to get an extended towel recap on day 14 because of Hank Brennan's Aruba motion. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we aren't just because in Hank Brennan's motion, he noticed that he noticed the defense and told Judge Cannoni he wants to call 4 witnesses or so about the Aruba incident. Who's the second witness? Laura Sullivan. Karen never apologized to Marietta Sullivan about mistaking John hugging Marietta and lying about John cheating. But operatively, as to what the lie told to Higgins a few weeks later on January 5th, 2022, we're about to hear while still in Aruba, Karen told Laura Sullivan that John never cheated on her. Karen just mistook John hugging Marietta and just went off for no reason. Ladies and gentlemen, that proves that Karen lied to Higgins on January 12th. And folks, by the way, just before we go into this recap, did you know that the reason why Karen Reed, I think, started that affair on January 12th, 2022, is that was the anniversary of Kaylee and KF and PF's father, Steve, his passing. John adopted his double orphan niece and nephew after John's dear sister Kristen passed away from a medical condition in November of 2013. And then Steve, John's brother-in-law, Kristen's husband, passed away from a medical condition in January of 2022. And that situation led John to adopt KF and PF. And every year on January 12th, the family honors the anniversary of Steve's passing. And I think that day Karen was jealous that John was paying attention to someone other than her. So Karen lied about this Aruba situation, said John cheated on her to try to bait John's friend Brian Higgins into an affair, until Higgins realized what Karen was doing, just using Higgins to emotionally hurt John as the relationship ended, and cut it off. And ladies and gentlemen, Laura Sullivan's testimony is what ties it all together. Let's listen. My name's Grant Smith Ellis, extended day 14 recap, and we're here to watch it.
Area where you were, is that right?
Correct.
Oh, and by the way, this isn't part of the Day 14 recap. This is only part of the Day 14 recap to the extent that Hank Brennan filed the Aruba motion. And this is a preview of the testimony we're going to see when that motion is allowed.
And do you know where Mr. O'Keefe was at that point?
I do not know.
And when your sister comes out to the pool area, what happened?
She said...
Yeah, that's sustained. I thought you were doing something else.
When your sister comes out to the pool area, how would you describe her demeanor when she comes out?
No, I'll allow that.
She was frustrated.
And at some point, did you have a conversation, without regard to what the conversation was? At some point, did you have a conversation with her about something that had just happened?
Yes.
Now, following that conversation with your sister, at some point subsequent to that, Mr. O'Keefe come back out to the pool area?
After I spoke with her, yes, he came out to the pool area.
And you know about how long a period of time it was between the time that your sister came out to the pool area and Mr. O'Keefe came out to the pool area?
I mean, I would say approximately 20 minutes, but I don't really know exact timing.
Now, when Mr. O'Keefe came back out, did you have any conversation with him?
I did.
And can you describe that conversation?
All right, is this the instruction that you were talking about instead of the other one? All right, so jurors, I have another instruction for you. So you're about to hear evidence of statements made by John O'Keefe. Is that accurate now, Mr. Lally?
Yes.
All right. These statements are being admitted only for a limited purpose of establishing John O'Keefe's state of mind. You're not to consider this testimony as proof that the defendant has a bad character or propensity to commit crimes. The testimony of witnesses recounting conversations with Mr. O'Keefe can only be used as they go to the defendant's motive or intent on January 28th or 29th, and only if you find that the defendant was aware of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind at the time of the crime and would be likely to respond to it. There need not be direct evidence that the defendant learned of Mr. O'Keefe's state of mind, so long as you reasonably can infer from the evidence that she did learn of it. Okay, Mr. Lally.
This is subject to our objection.
Yes, yep.
So, Ms. Sullivan, if I could take you back again. So Mr. O'Keefe comes out, you have a conversation with him. Can you describe to the jury what that conversation was about?
I turned around and I was pretty shocked to see him. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, nothing. I said, did Etta and Karen have words? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, that's not what Etta said. And I asked him if everything was okay. And at that time, his phone was lighting up, and it looked like calls and texts. And it said Karen on his phone.
After you make that observation, what did you say to John?
I asked him if he needed to take it, and he said, yes, she's crazy. I got to take care of this.
And was that the last time that you saw him on New Year's Eve?
It is.
Now, turning your attention to the following day, New Year's Day, did you see either Mr. O'Keefe or Miss Reed at all on that day?
I did not. I saw the children, but we didn't see them that day, no.
Now, turning your attention to the following day, being January 2nd, what was sort of the plan as far as what was going on that day?
Our hotel has a private island. The hotel that we stay at has a private island, and we rented all 8 of the cabanas between the 60 of us that were there. And when the cabanas went on sale, I had reached out to John and asked him if he wanted me to get him one. And he said, sure. So I booked one for him, and he paid me for that cabana. So we all went out that morning. And it was probably around, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't there yet. And so I sent him a text and I said, are you coming, or do you want me to sell this cabana? Because there was other, couples there. At least he could have made, the money back. And he asked me who was there. And I said, everybody. And I named off a couple names. I'm not really sure, but I said, everybody's here.
And when you said that, how did Mr. O'Keefe respond?
He said, well, apparently I made out with your sister the other night, according to Karen.
Now, is that the first time that you had heard that?
Yes.
So fair to say whatever you had heard from your sister on December 31st was not that? Objection.
No, I'll allow that.
Correct.
And what was your reaction when Mr. O'Keefe told you this? Objection.
I'll allow it.
I was shocked. I immediately found my sister and said, did you make out with John?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, when you went to talk to your sister, who was it that your sister was with when you went to talk to her about that?
I don't recall who was standing near her. Maybe my mom. I don't know.
As far as your sister was concerned at that time, was she dating someone?
Yes.
And the person that she was dating, was that person on the trip as well?
He was, yes.
And was that person that she was dating that was on the trip as well? Were they at the cabanas on that day that you?
They were, yes.
Now, as far as you have some conversation in regard to your sister, and then at some point you go back and have further conversation with Mr. O'Keefe.
Yeah, I said I texted him back. I said, I just talked to Etta. She said, absolutely not. That did not happen.
That's sustained. I'll strike that.
Now, at some point after that exchange, did Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed and or the kids come out through the cabana area?
They did, yes.
And at any point, how would you describe sort of how Mr. O'Keefe and or Ms. Reed was acting when they came out to the cabana?
Karen immediately went in the water. I just recall her being like floating in the ocean for a good chunk of the day. John was hopping around from the different cabanas talking to people. One of my favorite pictures of him is with my son from that day.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe once he came out to the cabana area?
No, we kind of just kept it light. We didn't really talk about anything that had happened. I was just kind of trying to stay out of it for now.
And following sort of the cabana situation or the cabana day, what happened then?
Suppose that day, I think I saw John one other time. I saw him in the pool, It was the one time that him and I were alone. He didn't seem like he was himself.
I'll allow it.
He seemed distant, and I asked him if he was okay. And he kind of just, shrugged it off. And I said, are you happy? And he kind of, just rolled his eyes and shrugged it off. I said, well, something along the lines of life is too short to not be happy. And he goes, well, Laura, it is what it is. And I did ask him if he wanted to talk about it. I said, do you want to talk about it? And he's like, not really.
And so following that exchange in the pool area, when was the next time that you saw them?
I had spoken to him. We all went on the Jolly Pirate. We had all bought tickets in advance. So we had basically rented the whole boat for everybody to go. Had bought 4 tickets, and we had gotten a bus from our hotel. And he didn't show up for the bus and wasn't answering my calls or my texts. And then we finally got down to where the boat was. The boat was about to leave, and he messaged me. He's like, not going to make it. Kids slept late. And so I didn't think anything of it. Then after that, I saw him and Karen the night before they left. They ended up leaving a day or two early so that the kids could get back to school.
And when you saw them, where was that in relation to the hotel?
Right outside the hotel is a marketplace that has a bunch of restaurants and arcade. I was sitting at the 5 o'clock somewhere bar that looks into the arcade with my best friend Val, and my friends Dave and Laura and Karen and John walked up.
What, if any, conversation did you have with either Mr. O'Keefe or the defendant at that time?
Karen grabbed me and she said, hey, I'm sorry. I thought I saw something that I didn't, and I would like to pay for some of your sister's room.
And how did you respond to that?
I said it's absolutely not necessary. Just an apology will do.
And did she persist in wanting to pay for the room?
She did.
And how so?
She just said, I will apologize, but something along the lines of, I want to pay for some of her room. Can I just have her room number? I don't remember if I gave her the room number or not. I don't really know. And
with regard to that trip, when was the next time, or when was the last time that you saw her?
So, the day that they were leaving, I saw him by the pool. He came up, he gave me a big hug. He said, I love you. This was a great trip. Thank you so much. And I said, well, you're definitely in again for next year. And he said, absolutely. And that was the last time I physically saw him.
And so that conversation, just turning back for a moment, as far as with regard to Ms. Reed, what day that would have been, as far as in relation to when they were leaving, early January 32nd?
I want to say it was the 5th.
So there you go, folks. 7 days before Karen lied to Higgins. You heard it from Laura Sullivan herself. The Aruba testimony. Folks, it's coming in. That was your day 14, John O'Keefe, Karen Reed, and retrial recap. But more so, it was a preview. My name's Grant Smith Ellis. I have to say goodbye to the Towel Friends, but let's end this clip. Follow along every day. We're almost at 1,000 Towel subscribers on youtube.com/@GrantSmithEllis. Warms little Towel's heart. Today's stream was in honor of my late father, Fredric Ellis, who passed away overnight from cancer. And Crime Cricket, the dear honorary Towel, Crime Cricket's mother, who passed away this weekend. Dear Towel Friends, say a prayer, keep a thought. However it is you express your compassion for all of us in the Towel universe. And thank you for watching this recap.